Welcome to Total Design Live. It's a podcast where real tabletop game designers, with a surprise set of design constraints, design a game right before your very ears. It's game design without a net, and it starts now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Season 2 of Total Design Live. I'm David Abelson.
And I'm Rosco Schock. Thanks for joining us. This episode, we are welcoming game designer Emily Vincent. Hey, Emily, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's just great to have you here. And thank you for agreeing to be part of this season's torture session, as it were.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, we are too. For those who may not have met you before or don't know about you, could you tell us just a little bit about your game design background and a couple of things you've been up to recently?
Sure. So I'm a user experience engineer by training who got into game design a couple years ago. I've been playing games for forever, but just started designing. And I sort of threw myself into it completely. So I have a game that's coming out this fall called Knitting Circle, which is very exciting. And I am launching my very first self-published game, Pirates of the High Teas. So I do a lot of sort of games with whimsical themes, but trying to get enough strategic bite that some of your strategy players want to play them, hopefully over and over again.
So,
Awesome.
where did you start playing games? Was that a long time ago, or?
So I was one of those kids that was in like the after school program because my parents worked later, and so we played a lot of Guess Who and Monopoly with all the wrong rules, and I think I played like Stratego or something. As we sort of progressed through the years, on my very long bus ride to high school, I started playing bridge and capitalism on the bus because it was a very long bus ride through Northern Virginia traffic. And then sort of in the, early 2000s, got introduced to Catan and eventually Dominion and Pandemic and, all of those types of things. So it's various types of games over the course of my gaming lifetime. But I've also been going to PAX East for like the last 10 years with my partner, where we just go and we camp in the board game area and we just play as many board games as we can.
Awesome. Thanks for that background. I know you have a bunch of stuff coming out, and it's all super exciting. And privy to a little bit of stuff that's coming soon. So it's going to be a whole summer of adventure. So a lot of good stuff there. Before we get into the live portion of this podcast episode, Dave's going to go through a little bit of the rules. So over to Dave.
Okay. Hey, so this is really more for our audience because I know you've been listening to some episodes, so you kind of know what's going on. But before we dive in, we're just going to go over these ground rules, right? So you're going to be given 2 constraints. You'll be asked to design as much of a game as you can in 45 minutes. One of the constraints will be fairly specific, and it's intended to just give you sort of an anchor point, and the other constraint will be fairly vague, kind of wide open, and it's intended to just give you a direction to travel, but we want to make sure that you still have a nice big canvas on which to paint. These constraints, they could be related to theme or mechanics or components, game category, or even player experience, which kind of maybe is your expertise, and anything not specified is open to your interpretation. Good?
Cool.
Okay. So we're mostly interested in your thought process. We're not really looking for you to balance the game here on the show, but we want to hear how you approach creative thinking, how you solve problems, how you develop the sort of the framework of the game. And then we're here to be a sounding board in case you need any help in that way. But our goal is purely to help the audience better understand your creative process. So once we get you the constraints, we're going to walk you through a set of general questions to sort of get you started and get your train on the tracks, and then the rest is up to you.
Sound great.
And now the moment you've been waiting for or fearing, depending on your perspective. Time for the constraints for Season 2. We are going to have a component constraint and a theme constraint again this time. And this one's going to be a little topical, I guess would be the right word. The 2 constraints are components. You have to use some number of polyhedral dice, or nerd dice, or D&D dice, or however you want to think about that, nerd dice. And the theme, that is the topical part, is going to be something related to the Olympics.
Yes, I love the Olympics.
Coming up soon, which is probably when this will be airing. So that's the thing. Yeah, and so we would like you to try to use not just like a bunch of D6. You try to use 4 or more types. So like, a D12 and a D8 and several different types, hopefully 4 or more. You don't have to use all of them. But we want you to have some variance there for the players.
Yeah, and D100 is not required at all.
But available.
It's hard to fit in a box.
What's your first thought? Let's jump into some questions to kind of like get your engine going here. What are your first thought when you think of this theme?
The theme, the Olympics theme.
Yep.
So I think about the fact that I absolutely love the Olympics and I always want to be at home to watch as much of them as possible. So I sort of start thinking about the Summer Olympics, right, which because that's what's coming. I think I might like the Winter Olympics more. So there's immediately part of me that wants to go straight to winter. I keep coming because we're talking polyhedral dice. It's making me think decathlon because that has deca in it, right? Uh, it's also making me think about races, which I don't love the idea of, but I feel like there's so much in the Olympics that are races. And so I think where my brain is already going is dice suggests randomness, and what in the Olympics is about randomness, and how do you make that interesting and not just random. Um, but yeah, I love the esoteric sports as well. So I'm like, can we do? I mean, and curling is no longer esoteric, right? But like, are there some weird, interesting sports that aren't the decathlon that might be interesting? So I
You
think
mean like
that's
handball?
yeah, handball, or I guess people. There's ping pong. There was field hockey. Is surfing still? Is surfing in for the first time, or was it in the first time last time? Um,
I can't
rock
recall, but
climbing.
flag football.
Yep, rock climbing. There was sevens rugby at one point last time, I think, but I'm not sure if it made the cut.
Kayaking, I think, is still in there.
Yep. I think the other thing, all right, now that we're talking about this, the Olympics are in Paris, and like this is going to be a transportation nightmare. And so it might not be an Olympic sport. It might be like getting to the Olympics. Which
Well,
I
that's
mean, there's
interesting
something
too.
about the subway. What was that, Roscoe?
No, I was just say like, well, there's lots of you just said getting to the Olympics, like that could mean a myriad of things. So let me just ask you a separate question real quick,
Yeah.
just to keep things going. Um, does this theme speak to a certain game weight or mechanic or kind of game category? Like, like Euro versus roll and write versus, I mean, obviously roll and write maybe makes a little bit of sense, but card game or whatever. Just curious if that spawns anything.
So for me, it feels like it needs to be a lighter weight game. And I don't know how much of this is true, but I have this impression that gamers and sports don't always overlap well, right? That people are like, board gamers don't want to buy football games, right? So there's something there. I do think what you said, Roscoe, about getting to the Olympics, like the preparation part, that could be an interesting sort of heavier Euro type thing. It actually makes me think of I've been noodling around for a couple years with a game about ultra marathons because my partner runs ultra marathons. It's been challenging because the race itself is very solo, right? Like you could make a race game out of it, but that's less interesting. Um, and the race you sort of run solo. And so some of what I've been playing with is there's something about your training regimen and your prep that is where the game is, right? And that to me starts to feel a little, I don't know, resource management-y and could maybe go in a Euro direction.
It's an interesting idea. I know we're a little off topic here, but there is a game called Pit Crew, and Pit Crew is a NASCAR game, but it's not a NASCAR game about racing. It's a NASCAR game about making sure that the car gets back on the track as fast as possible. And
Yeah.
racing is like 5% of the game.
Yeah. I think that's for me. I want racing to be very little or maybe nothing in whatever this game becomes. Um, but then there's things like gymnastics, which have the artistic element, right? And so, what could you do with like rhythmic gymnastics and this theme? I don't know. So many ideas.
Yep. Just one last thing on theme.
Yeah.
It just to kind of follow up on the one thing you said, which I think is true. I was going to ask the question that we have here of, is there any games that do this theme well, right? And so, to your point, there's not a lot of sports games, right? It's every publisher that I've ever talked to said like they will never publish a sports game. I have a curling game. This is an FNY, but I like abandoned it 5 years ago because like nobody was even interested in hearing about it. But Flamme Rouge is one that does bicycle racing very well, just as a thing. So it's a racing thing, but it works in this card-based system that's really, really clever. And I know Heat Pedal to the Metal is not Olympics, but it uses a similar system. And I know Julio um, is doing some kind of Olympic-based 18 card games for Button Shy. I think one or two of them have come out. I haven't played them yet. I know he's talked about them, but yeah, I think by and large, just even sports games writ large, there's just not a lot to go on there. Which, actually, that might be an interesting thing for the season because it'll be less of like kind of borrowing from A, B, and C and mixing them in a different way, and like kind of like more like Virgin Snow, like make your own trail kind of thing. So, yeah, we talked about theme a little bit. Dave, you want to ask some questions about the components? See if that spawns anything.
I mean, I think I only have pretty much one question about components. Really, do these components, this polyhedral dice and the different shapes and sizes and colors and numbers, does that suggest a specific decision tree or sort of movement in the game for players already, or is it something you think you have to work into?
I think I'm gonna have to think about that one, right? So my first reaction to the polyhedral dice is I refuse to use them as counters, or I hate using dice as counters. Like it drives me absolutely nuts. And then I sort of also go to like how I use them in D&D because that is my touch point to polyhedral dice, right? So given that I don't think I want to do like a straight up combat system. I mean, we could do sumo wrestling and roll different dice, but um, that's probably not it. And that I know I don't want to use them as trackers, right? That suggests to me that I'm going to have to think of how I want to use this randomness, particularly because it's going to be multiple flavors of it. Yeah. So I gotta figure that one out. I don't do a lot of dice. Um, I thought I was. I always try to put dice and stuff, and then I always end up cutting it. So
Dice can be interesting or they can be troublesome. Just a reminder, not that you need the help. Just because there's dice doesn't mean they have to be rolled.
right. I guess what else do I do with them other than track with them, which I have already
I
stated
guess
that
that's up
I
to
dislike.
you.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that did pop into my head is a dexterity game, right? Given that the Olympics are about dexterity, what if this is just a dex game, right? And we are going to stack these dice to do your rhythmic gymnastics like a meeple circus or something like that.
Now, how would you do biathlon?
You throw them at the other players, yeah, and
Could
see
be.
which point hits them in the face. Yeah, that doesn't feel like a good, not safe for children game.
So I guess this sort of leans in the direction of where you headed, but is there a game that you know of that uses polyhedral dice poorly or really well, or for that matter, that uses them
I mean,
other
Dungeons and
than
Dragons.
Dungeons and Dragons,
I
which of
mean,
course.
yeah. Did David just go away?
No,
Okay.
I'm still here. Go ahead.
Sorry. Apologies. Yeah, so I what uses poly so I've been playing Tesseract a bunch, but that's all D6s. Um
Lots of them.
so many, but I love it. I don't think I have a lot of games other than Dungeons and Dragons or various RPGs that are using these polyhedral dice. So yeah, I can't think of any good examples. Do you have examples of games that use polyhedral dice like this?
The only
I
one.
honestly can't think of any really good examples either. Although there was the Game Crafter or somebody ran a competition where you had to design a roll and write game using polyhedral dice. As a result of that, I saw some very interesting designs because I happened to be happened to be around. I didn't see any that were Olympics based. I'm sorry, you're on your own.
It's all right.
Yeah, the speaking of that, I think it was a Gen Cant, and then it was like partially with Button Shy that sponsored that. I know I made one too. So actually, the game that I was going to mention is Clarence Simpson's Merchants of Magic. I think that's what it's called. That one uses them in that way. That game was initially designed for that Gen Cant challenge, and then like he added some other stuff too. And so I just wanted to remember that one piece. One thing that we said before, just to reiterate, although we're saying you have to use the dice in some meaningful way, it doesn't have to be the main thing of the game. They just have to be used. It's not like it has to be only a dice game where you do stuff and the dice get rolled or whatever. You can add as many things as you want. Like they just have to serve some game purpose. So again, if it's not specified, you can make this part of a much different game.
There's no rule that says that you have to use the numbers that are normally found on polyhedral dice. You can imagine them having whatever symbols or numbers or letters that you want.
Yeah. Sweet.
All right. I think you've got enough to start with. I hope you do.
I think so.
Best of luck.
Thank you.
And your 45 minutes begins now.
Okay, so I've got a piece of paper over here that you can't see because this is part of my process. So where I'm going to start is trying to get a sense of what are the different sort of like stories that this could be telling and which one am I most interested in. So I think and this is going to cover some ground we sort of already talked about, but I need to capture it all in like a little bulleted list. So, all right, so there is preparing for the Olympics. Just going to start there. There's like preparing the city. So there could be something about a transportation system and a infrastructure and like how do you build all the stadiums and how do you make sure there's places for people to stay. The other thing that popped into my head on this is also like preparing the opening ceremony. So that this could maybe be like a choreography game or something like that, which could be interesting maybe, and sort of speaks to me liking to pull some of my various art interests in. So those would be, well, preparing the city feels like a heavier thing. Then there's like preparing a specific athlete. So that might be like a training sort of thing. And then there's like preparing a team. So how do you choose Team USA? And so maybe you're the coach and you're trying to put together the winningest squad or something like that. So you'd go through various rounds of competition and selection or something like that to get the best team. And so maybe then each of the players is, drafting a team and you're setting them up against each other. And if you're doing that, I guess you're different countries. And so you're literally competing in the Olympics, which I guess takes me right to, it could straight up be a competition around a specific sport, or it could be some larger, Team USA across like diving and swimming and things like that. I'm just writing down diving because I love watching diving, and that would be a fun sport to play with. And then I got to write down the decathlon idea because it matches with the dice. I'm probably going to cross off preparing the city just because that feels not super fun for me. Someone will love that, but it is not for me. And I'm feeling drawn to one of these sports that has like the artistic piece of it, right? So whether it's diving or rhythmic gymnastics or synchronized swimming, those feel interesting to me to take on. So I think I'm leaning towards trying to do a sport, even though I just explored this whole area and was like, maybe it's not a sport. Let's do a sport because that feels more fun. Okay, so if I've got diving, decathlon, rhythmic gymnastics, I'm sticking with the summer because that's what we're going to. What was the other one I said? Oh, synchronized swimming. Why not? I did play a fun synchronized swimming game last year at Gen Con, so maybe it's not that one. But, so now that I've got we're going to narrow in on a sport, I kind of want to think about, I keep getting caught up on these dice, and I think I may need to put the dice aside for a second. In my head, I'm just going to say the dice are thinking, I'm feeling like there's a bag builder in here somewhere. I'm going to put the dice in a bag. We're going to have different colors of dice that represent something. And then we got a bunch of dimensions there that I got to deal with later, but dice are going in a bag and coming out later for right now. Um, okay, so all right, I just got to pick a sport to like explore. And sometimes in my process, I just pick something and explore it, and then go and explore the next thing. Um, so let's talk about diving, because I don't know, for whatever reason I've fixated on diving right now. Um, so diving has different heights of platforms. Diving has um, like pairs, like synchronized diving and solo diving. Um, I think there's a team competition like gymnastics. Um, but so there's a couple things there. So I guess if I understand the space of diving, right? And so then in diving uh you have number of flips, you have inversions, you have front versus back, you have amount of splash going into the pool, right? There's all these sort of dimensions that you can play with to get to your scoring. So I think that's probably where I'm going to go next, which is like, what does it look like to win? To win at diving in this game? Um I don't know. I feel like I'm falling into such a trap of like I'm just making a simulation. Yeah.
So I've got a question
Yeah.
because this is interesting. One of the things, because I'm a teacher by day, one of the things that we do in teaching when we're planning, and I think they do this in lots of other fields as well, is they start with the end and then work their way backwards. And
Mhm.
I noticed you just tapped on that, right? So you're like, okay, so we're this is what we're doing. How do we
Mhm.
win? So that now we know what, so that it sort of instructs what you are going to do. Is that what you're about to do for us?
Yeah, I think so, right? And I gotta feel like that's a fun ending condition. So I think what I want the end would look like would actually be some sort of tableau or sequence. So you felt like you built something cool. Um, so I actually don't think diving is going to lend itself well to that because diving is so fast. So what I'm imagining would be cool is if you could put out, I've created this like routine, right? Like I choreographed a thing and it was from X to Y to Z. And then like I see how well I can execute it. And maybe you get to do it in a couple rounds. You can see how you can improve the execution or change the routine. But something that at the end of it, you can be like, I feel really proud of this. And it would be super cool if I could actually do all these things. So I'm going to pivot. I'm going to pivot to rhythmic gymnastics because that feels, I mean, it's got a longer duration, right? And it's got a bunch of cool looking things that you can do, cool looking tricks. So I think you could put together some, set of cards that's gonna tell a story. That then people would be like, yeah, but did you see when I put that triple backflip right into the middle of and I threw the ribbon in the air and then I caught it? Because I think that I don't know, that's like a piece of the Olympics that I feel like when people watch, they're like, man, that's so cool if I could do those things. And so maybe the experience of creating that, of choreographing it, would be fun. The other thing that says to me is that there's probably, well, I'm going to get myself into trouble here. There's probably some sort of push your luck element to that. Because to just say, I'm going to execute A, B, C, D, and then you put it down and you execute it is less a game. And so you probably need the ability to say, I'm going to try and do this really hard thing and maybe I'll fail. And I guess that's where the dice come in. So, all right, we are making a rhythmic gymnastics game. And it has cards that have tricks. I'm going to say their difficulty are related to the different dice, right? So, harder tricks are bigger dice and easier tricks are smaller dice. I'm not sure. I got to think about that. But it's something like that, right? Where the easier tricks, yeah. That's I think what I want. The easier tricks are smaller dice. And so when you do well, right? Okay, let me explain what I'm going for. What I'm trying to get to is that like when you do well at an easy trick, you still don't get a ton of points, but that when you do badly at a hard trick, maybe you still get decent points. And so I think that means I want harder tricks on a bigger die because there's more options. I don't know. this is where I get murky and would have to like try it like a bunch of times, be like, all right, these flips are all D10s and what happens. But yeah, so if you say, you know, flips are an average of 5 because they're on a D10, and you know, something else, some other cool trick, you throw it and you tumble and you whatever, are a D20. I think what I'm struggling with that I'm not articulating well feels like then there has to be like a success threshold, and I don't know quite how to set that with these different dice. But there's also part of me that's like, that's a problem for future me.
I would definitely agree that that's a problem for future you. That gets into that thing that we talked about in the beginning of we're not worried about balance. I think that definitely is something that you would do later.
Yeah.
So just keep going.
Okay, so I've got my cards with my tricks. I've got my dice that I'll roll to see how well I execute this routine that I'm going to somehow build. So I got to get my cards and find a way. So I got to find a way to get them. I got to find a way to play them and have constraints on the playing of them. And I got to find a way to interact with other people, because right now I'm playing like single player solitaire over here. I think the other side of it that I don't want to lose is, in my mind, there's a artistic flair piece of it. So there's a second dimension, right? There's the technical aspect and there's the like, how beautiful did you execute it? And so I'm just going to sort of pin that, but my thought is that there's either a second set of cards that modifies your trick, right? So you have a technical trick and an artistic element card, or you have that the dice themselves, right? Like if you roll a red D20 versus a yellow D20, there's something in there that gets you your artistic merits or artistic score or something like that. So there's a second dimension that needs to be solved for, and it needs to not all be a simulation. Okay, so how do I get tricks as a gymnast? Presumably I train a lot. I choose coaches. I perhaps specialize in things. I don't know that I want to go as deep as like having a talent or a skill tree sort of thing, and invest your resource points in your training resources in flips and build up your something. That is the first place my mind went to. I suspect that is heavier than what I want to do for this game, but we'll just leave that floating there. But I think the idea of specializing might be interesting. What if instead of a resource tree, it's some sort of set collection where the more flip cards you get, the higher your point abilities go, right? So backtracking on those dice, maybe it's like sushi go, right? The more flips I get, the bigger dice I can roll for it, or the more times I can roll the die, right? And yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe there's a little bit of like advantage based on my set collection ness, which then, man, this whole thing is like one run-on sentence, just so you know. I'm not sure where my punctuation is. So where that just took me is that some sports have required routines, right? Or required elements in their routines, which could be a way to structure your rounds, right? So maybe there's something that comes out or gets built over the course of the round of the required elements in this routine are, 3 flips and 2 throws and something, right? And then you are trying to collect your way into skills that will let you execute the whole, like the totality of that program to the best of your ability.
I don't know so much about gymnastics, but I know that in figure skating, which I'm fond of,
Yeah.
they do have a way that you can attempt something that's more complex or a more complex set of things for a higher score potential, right? So
Yeah.
it sounds like that's where you're leaning. I don't know if they do that in do they do that in gymnastics?
So I don't know. So I like watching rhythmic gymnastics. I don't really know how the scoring works. I'm assuming some of it is related to I don't know what the not rhythmic gymnastics. I think it's like acrobatic gymnastics. But so there you have your tricks are worth a set point score based on the difficulty of the trick, right? So this trick is max value 7, that one's max value 15, and then you do the trick and they deduct based on how badly you did it.
So it sounds
um,
exactly like what you were explaining with the
yeah,
dice.
yeah. And so that does make me a little concerned that I'm going straight to simulation. But I think there's something interesting. I think there might be something interesting in people being able to sort of learn a little bit about how some of this works as well. If all you've done is watch and been like, wow, look at that person do a triple Lutz, right?
Plus, I
I
think
do
there's,
think,
oh,
yeah, go ahead.
sorry. I think there's a thing where people who do play board games about sports sort of expect an element of simulatiness
Yeah.
because it helps them to feel like they're in it rather
Hmm.
than looking at it. I don't think
Yeah.
it's bad.
I was also going to say, I feel like this system will lend itself to other sports. So I'm just saying you do the Summer Olympics with gymnastics, and then when the Winter Olympics comes out in 2 years, you release the reskin slash expansion that is figure skating, right? Totally works. And then you can go co op because you have pairs figure skating or you have team figure skating and you've got the like multi-person rhythmic gymnastics. I mean, this whole thing, there's a whole universe here, whole expanded sports board game universe. Yeah.
And then there's ice dancing. So who
I
knows?
love it. I love it. Okay, so all right, so we're gonna set collect these trick cards. And so how do we get there? So my first instinct is usually to just start by putting them in a market and then testing the game and see how that works or not. There's nothing about this theme that has me sort of particularly going to like, is this type of market, is that type of market. I don't think I want to do an auction just because I don't like auctions. I think they're slow and then you got to have money, resources or something like that. And I just but there could be some sort of constraint on what you can take for the market, right? So if we think about you taking your cards is thinking about how you're going to spend your time in practice. Maybe you sort of, for each draft, you can only take, let's say 8 hours of practice, right? And so each trick has some cost associated with it in terms of practice. And so like you can take 2 backflips or you can take like 5, throw the ball and catch it sort of thing, right? But I guess I just invented money. I didn't want money. I don't know. There needs to be something with the market and how do you get these tricks? Or how do you get these? Well, that's confusing. Not tricks like trick taking, tricks like. So, yeah, I meant trick like gymnastics tricks, not trick like trick taking. So, yeah, there's a market. Right now, I guess you just sort of go in turn order. You draft from the market, and then you've got stuff in your hand. How do you play it from your hand? This doesn't feel interesting to me right now of how do we get these cards? What are some other ways that I could get cards? It feels like I want to pull on the metaphor of either training or of coaches. Coaches could be interesting because that could be some sort of worker placement or action selection, right? Rather than just there's cards in a market, it's my turn, I take some cards, then play passes to the next person. I think I want to do something where there's a set of things out, right? Maybe it's like the gym. We're in the gym and we can go train in different spaces. And so if you go to the pull-up bar, you're training whatever. If you go to the spot with the ribbons, you're training your artistry, right? So you can get different types of cards by going to different types of spaces, but it's like a worker placement sort of thing where once you take it, someone else can't. So I think I'd want to try something like that just because it feels a little bit more thematic and a little bit more interesting. So here's where I fall on my absolute favorite thing, which is the worker placement, where you put your worker, then it's going to determine something. If you get the best spot for worker placement, you've got some disadvantage going into the next round, right? So whether that cycles you down in the turn selection or not, uh, something like that, right? Yeah, that's what I think I'd want to do. So, all right, I need to like recap for my own brain. Yeah.
Yeah, so actually it's a good point to do that. So just give you a break to get a drink of water. You're about halfway through, so doing good. It sounds like you settled a little bit on rhythmic gymnastics with some training and some other stuff like that. So how are you feeling so far? Going okay?
Yeah, I mean, so interestingly, this is about the point where I feel like I would either put this piece of paper down and start a brand new design around the same theme or something like that, or where I might start trying to suss out some more details. So I feel like for this, I don't want to start a whole new design halfway through this episode, so maybe we'll flesh out some more thoughts and details here, but I am starting to feel like I'm getting to a point where like I'm not sure what else to like make decisions about without starting to prototype some of it.
And that can be a challenge. Actually, I mean, one of the things that I've been thinking about, and trying not to interject into your process, but this whole part of training to me sounds that you started talking about to me sounds super interesting, right? Like
Yeah.
the to your other point, right? Diving, you literally train for like 4 years straight, and then you dive for 3 seconds,
Yeah.
and then you're done. You could be done, right?
Yep.
And so like there's just like this small performance window at the very, very end. But I
Yeah.
mean, it's based on all the preparation. So I think having a meaningful part of training, however you approach that, could be really interesting.
Yeah. And I think so. All right. So now we're going to get into a bunch of the thinking that I've done on training, right? Which is that there's the sort of physical and then there's the mental, right? Of like, because to your point, right? I could have it all in my body and then, I have a momentary stray thought and like the whole dive goes awry, right? And then I think the other thing is like for these longer things like gymnastics, one bad situation at the beginning of a routine can spiral into the whole thing falling apart. So there's certainly something interesting in that. I think I've also like read interviews with athletes who are like, yeah, my going to figure skating, right? My strategy was I can land the quads and I will just, flip my arm a little bit to do something artistic. I'm not even really going to try and get the artistic scores. I'm just going to stick the big tricks, which I think is where in this game. So let's talk about paths to victory, because there should be multiple. If there are required elements of your routine, but I think there's something about you making the trade-off of like, am I going to try and stick a couple of really big point scorers, or am I going to try and do like the long routine that gets all sort of like artistry scores, or and that's where I think I said there was that second dimension, because in training, right, you could spend your time training flips, or you can go to ballet class, right, which gives you a sort of really different set of skills and like movement quality and things like that get you to like those some of those amazing athletes. You're just like, there's just that je ne sais quoi, right? Like it's just they have it, right? There's something in their presence that they have. So yeah, that feels like if we're talking about training as worker placement or stations or something like that, investing your time in some of those ephemeral things, right, could be interesting. So maybe, all right, going back to the artistry piece of it. So some of the worker placement training things get you the cards that we're going to use for our set collection, right? The cards that amp up your flipping or your throwing or your catching. I think maybe some of them get you, maybe it's just bonus dice, like bonus artistry dice. So like you start out by being able to train to get D4s as your artistry dice, and then maybe eventually you can get D6s as your artistry dice, and then maybe you up to 8s and 10s and stuff like that. So even if you're only doing D10 flips, if you're throwing a D10 artistry on top of it, maybe that gets you to the same place as someone who's throwing D20 flips. So I need to come back to these dice though, because I have big concerns about the success of this routine being on how well I roll a D20. That feels poor. So maybe it's not, I don't know. I'm worried about people rolling ones, right? Dice
Well, I
are
think you
so
said
spinny.
earlier. I thought you had said earlier that you were thinking maybe that the set collection part that having extra of those could be rerolls or something. So
Yeah,
just reminding you of that of your previous
thank you.
thought, like there's mitigation there that you could expand on.
And it might be something like, because we've got cards, we've got space to put some information. So maybe, when you roll a 1 through 10 on a d20, it just automatically locks it at 10, right? You can never go below a certain value or something, or an 8 or something. So even when you roll badly, it's not catastrophically badly. unless you do something like, I don't even want to say that. I was gonna say unless you roll all natural ones, but then someone's gonna do it, and that's gonna suck. I would say the other thing it could be is that your cards give you your base value, right? So flips are 20s, right? D20s, but if you have one card, your base value is 2. If you have 3 cards, your base value is 5, right? Whatever it is. And that then, again, we've got that Sushi Go style. Oh, I just put my elbow on the keyboard. That was fun. Sushi Go style sort of scoring where as you set collect, you can get different types of ramps based on what trick you're trying to do. So flips increase very slowly, and other things increase quickly and linearly versus not, etc., etc. I wonder if there's any tricks you can overtrain. So I guess, all right, there's multiple ways to win, because you can focus on the technical, or you can sort of take this artistry angle. There's probably a number of tricks, right? You can do a few big ones or a whole lot of small ones. I feel like I want the game to go in rounds, so that you could you do one routine after a little bit of training, and it's, let's call it your qualifiers, right? Your Olympic qualifiers, and it's a short one, and then you can build up some more skill, and then you go to the first round of the Olympics, and you go on to the second round. But yeah, 3 feels good. Let's do 3 routines. I don't know, maybe there's something fun to help people get into the spirit of it. So there's some sort of additional assignment of either your country, and so you have to do something that's thematically related, or you get a song, or you get a picture of a costume, or I don't know, I don't quite know how that goes in, but I want there to be something where people can talk about it, right? Or maybe and this is, I don't know, yeah, there are cards that have music. There's a Spotify playlist, right, where you can say, all right, y'all, I'm going to tell you about my routine, and you're going to watch me roll my dice, and we're going to put on some opera song in the background, which I can't think of the name of an opera song right now. All I've got is La Vie Boheme, which I'm pretty sure is from Rent. So whatever, we put on a song from Rent, and you do your gymnastics routine. It's going to be great, because I do like when games that sort of build out a tableau like this have engagement from other people into what's going on. So I would want to think about how you don't just turn it into, I've got a set of cards, you've got a set of cards, we rolled a bunch of dice, and I come out and I'm like 25, and you come back and you're like 27, and then you sort of lost the artistry and the tying into the sport. So that could be something to think about, that this maybe doesn't lend itself to well yet. But yeah, I'm trying to think about how you pull this all together.
So I was just going to ask a clarifying question. You were
Mhm.
talking about this routine and the different tricks, and they have the difficulties, which affects the scoring, and that all makes sense. They also could have a time element that some parts of the trick take more, and you have to put the big tricks to the small tricks. Could you explain a little bit, at least your current thinking of how do you kind of build that? Is that a turn-based thing where you get to add a trick each time? Is it is that more of a time-based thing, like dexterity or some other thing where you have to plan it, or is it more of an action programming kind of thing where you're building it out, even if you don't know necessarily how the judging and stuff's going to work yet? Just
Yeah,
I'm not really sure on that part totally. So
I
give us
think
a better idea what you're thinking.
I think it's a little bit, because I'm thinking of it like a tableau, and I think it's a little bit action programming, right? So I'm imagining, we've got flip cards, we've got dance cards. There's probably some basic set of cards that you start with of you can always do, throw and a catch. You can always do a little dancey bit. You can always do a cartwheel, something like that. And so as you put them down, right, when I get a second cartwheel, I think my choice is, do I put it on top of the current cartwheel in the routine to plus up that cartwheel and make it a fancy cartwheel, make it an aerial, make it a round off, right? Or do I put a second cartwheel somewhere else in the routine, right? Because I want to do 2 of them at a lower value, versus sort of stack them up. Right. And so that implies to me that as we go through these rounds, I want there to be more slots, right? Your first round can only have 4 slots, 4 tricks. Your second round has 6, and your third round has 9, or something like that. So that then you sort of, you may back yourself into a corner where you've you've put all 9 cards down and now you need to double down on something, and the only stuff available is not tricks you're already doing. And so now you have to go invest in artistry, even though that wasn't really your plan. I think off the cuff, right? You're building it as you pull in your cards. So maybe you start with a hand of 3, you get to pull a new card, and then everyone has to play a card down. And so you're sort of building as you go, as opposed to like holding a hand of like a mitt full of cards and then being like, I'm going to this and that and that, right? I want you to force yourself into decisions early that then you have to navigate around. I don't know. Does that help? Does that clarify?
Yeah. And again, we don't have to solve it on now. I was just trying to like tease out a little bit for the audience of like, kind of how you were imagining that part of the routine generation working, so they could help visualize that. One thing, just it's about 5-minute warning. So maybe you just want to like give a little recap and like kind of wrap your thoughts up a little bit, kind of where you think you're at now and where you could go from here.
All right, so we are preparing a rhythmic gymnastics routine. We're all individual athletes trying to do the best representing our country. So we're going to say we all have countries too. And maybe those countries have some sort of natural strength. So your starting deck is slightly different. Your starting hand is slightly different based on what country you come from. We've got some sort of worker placement thing to access our cards, which are our tricks. And so there's some order where you go to train in the gym and you get to take one of those cards into your hand. And then when you take your card, you're also going to play something down to build out your tableau, which is your routine. When we do our worker placement, that is going to have some sort of mechanism where the person who gets the best pick is at a disadvantage in the next round, whether that's turn order or something else. I'm not really sure. So you're building out these routines by sort of set collecting different tricks. So your choices are about, doubling down to increase the potential value of that trick versus sort of having more tricks that could potentially get at lesser values. Tricks will be related to dice rolling, where either the higher value tricks get you to a larger die, or maybe the more cards you have on that trick. I think the more cards was going to be re-rolls or something like that. So some tricks will have a natural value of a D4 or a D10 or something like that. The other thing in that action selection worker placement piece was going to be training in some of the artistry, which would be like bonus dice. And so you can sort of increase your artistry from, adding a D4 to adding a D6, D8, D10, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think as you're building out your routine, you're also going to get these dice that you can assign, your artistry dice, to different tricks. And then we'll get to the end of a round and you'll perform your routine, roll all your dice, and somehow communicate this in a fun way to the rest of your people. And then we'll collapse that and you'll go into a second and third round where you'll do that again. And there's probably something, your scores at the end of the round set you up for something the next round. Maybe it's performance order, maybe it's selection order. That could give you a little bit of a catch-up mechanic, because usually the highest scoring athletes go last in something like this. Yeah, and then there's a whole bunch of tuning that needs to be done with the dice, so it doesn't just feel like you're at the whims of the dice, and that it's a strategy piece of, you have some control. Definitely be packed something.
Awesome.
Great. It's nice to hear that you're super, super busy and super, super growing and still excited about the industry moving forward. And it was so great having you on the show today. Hey, listeners, if you want to join in any discussion about this episode this season, or if you'd like to participate in a future season, reach out to us online at Total Design Live, either on Twitter or Blue Sky. That's it for this episode, but we hope you'll join us again soon for more game design without a net. Until next time, I'm David.
And I'm Rosco. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Total Design Live. We hope this podcast will help inspire you in your own board game design journey and give you a peek behind the curtain about how other designers' creative process works. Please like and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We hope you'll come back and join us again for future episodes.